Early computers. Hi, I'm Vince. Welcome to my Vince Unlimited channel and to the story of my earliest brushes with the computer setups, with a story that starts in 1978 and charts the computers, hardware and software that entered my life up to the 2000s. Computers weren't common when I was at school, not even electronic calculators. In fact, for my 1978 mathematics examination, I was taught to calculate using log tables, a complex system of looking up pre-printed numbers in a grubby little book. So fascinating it wasn't that I couldn't repeat the same methods today. The previous year's intake had happily been using slide rules for their workings out. It was a well-practiced methodology using a foot-long snazzy piece of finely engineered multi-piece ruler with several tiny notched and printed scales, a sliding centre rule and a clear section against which you could work out an answer provided you knew what it was. It could have been 55, 0.55, 5.5 or 5.5 million, but at least you knew it had a couple of fives in it. However, the system worked and we were briefly shown one before it was whipped away, to be told that it would be superseded by electronic calculators, but as they were expensive and not be available for everyone that year, the old superseded logbooks would have to be used. This was the environment that I, as a 15-year-old in 1977, was asked the question, do you want to study computers? The question was posed by the teacher, who went on to show us all a flowchart which had very few choices such as yes, no or repeat and return. It didn't pique any interest at all, seemingly nothing to do with what was being talked about on Tomorrow's World, the gadget show of my childhood, so I declined the offer, much as 95% of the class did. Our early computer interest didn't get off to much of a start, and we all left school to get proper jobs. My proper job was an office-based apprentice in the construction industry, and there were no signs of computers there. Technology, for me, was limited to using the calculators that the school had forecasted. Even the telephones were permanently wired into the wall. Except the video games arcade machine on which we contested defender matches when we weren't playing Pong or using the mechanical pinball machines during our breaks and learning our trade at college. At home, my father was a relatively early computer adopter and in 1981 bought himself a Sinclair ZX81, known as the TS1000 stateside, with its futuristic but stifling membrane keyboard. Programming at the time was limited to laboriously typing weird sequences of alphanumeric characters in one by one in order to watch a blip of light move from one place to another, and in most cases it failed due to buggy programming or careless input, even when saved onto a squealing cassette tape. I remained unpiqued. I just wasn't interested in what it might achieve. In any case, I was far more interested in leaving home at the time. Soon after, a Sinclair ZX Spectrum was purchased by Dad, who then subsequently bought himself an Acorn BBC Micro B, so around 1984 he passed the Spectrum to me. This effectively became the first ever computer I had, only this time I was unmoved by both its limited potential and the fact it was doing it all in colour, and cannot really recall having it or what I did with it. My career had had a bit of a blip in 1982-1983, but I returned to work as an engineer proper in the same organisation, complete with company car, in 1984. There were still no computers in use there. A few years in and the secretaries were given electronic typewriters, then ones with little displays and even smaller memories, which were quite fascinating to watch, typing independently of the girls' finger pressing. However, soon there was talk of PCs being around, and the boss employed a chap to develop a computerised system of working, perhaps in a sly bid to get rid of his pesky engineers. In truth, the consultant he hired was useless, knew nothing at all about our industry, and seemingly less about computers and programming. I asked if I could assist him, was dismissed outright because he feared sharing credit. This assignment was to be his early retirement payout. However, it soon became clear that everything he had planned, and much more besides, was being developed elsewhere, much faster, much better and much cheaper, so he was summarily dismissed, having produced nothing. However, he left behind the huge all-in-one CP/M-based machine which the boss had paid for. By now the secretaries were using DOS-based IBM AT personal computers running an OS/2 to do their typing, so this anachronistic monster was about to be binned, so I took it home. It was in effect my second computer, and I can't recall what it was. Recent research suggests it may have been an AVL Eagle 1, a CP/M based machine with a single 5.5-inch floppy drive and no hard drive. It oozed potential through its strange green text beaming out from its integrated grey CRT screen. But I knew as much about CP/M programming as I did about French. C'est la vie. But just typing text into the command line from its solid keyboard was a satisfying and addictive thing. I did manage to type out some text and print it on the big roll of pre-punched paper, including, with my wife's assistance, a whole play I'd written at the time. It was 1990 and I clearly needed a proper computer. Back at work, I was frustrated that the only use made of the tabletop hogging IBMs was typing letters, despite their potential. I wasn't so much interested in the games of golf that the guys played on them during their lunch breaks, but my mind was on using them as originally planned by the boss, or better still, the writing career I'd always hankered after. One of the tasks I carried out at work was maintaining a database of prices relevant to our industry. It was done manually, and I could see the potential of using spreadsheets to partially automate this. By the way, we're talking Lotus 123 here. The boss had had his fingers burnt before, so he was biased against letting his engineers have their own desktop machines. He didn't want his engineers wasting time doing the typing, plus he rightly presumed we'd all be playing golf on them. However, things turned a new corner when he suddenly declared that it may be efficient to move my time from the drawing board onto computers and signed me up for a course in AutoCAD, the professional computerized drawing software. I leapt at the chance to do this. It would be prepping me for a bright future and give me skills the older engineers didn't or couldn't possess. So I embarked on a 6-week course of learning AutoCAD 10. I finished the course and was invited into a meeting with the boss to discuss our next move. He was surprised by my conclusion. I recommended that he didn't invest at this stage. I advised that whilst the process of drawing lines and symbols representative of my industry into a computer screen using a big specialised mouse pad would be more efficient than scratching delicate pen lines and neatly handwriting text onto a plastic sheet stretched across a massive drawing board, the process was flawed. Not all of our clients were doing the same. In fact, very few. I concluded that quick that I was in carrying out my work, I would spend an inordinate amount of time transferring other trades' layouts and dimensions into the system. Essentially, unless the architects, structural engineers and design consultants all got on board in our industry, there's very little efficiency in our services industry trying to jumpstart the future. The boss saved thousands not having to purchase the necessary hardware and software, and I missed out on heralding in a new dawn of computerization. By this time, of course, I had realised I was in a dinosaur environment, so I decided I would have to buy into computers myself. Gaming machines were starting to be prevalent, but gaming never interested me, and the thought of buying an early Atari or Commodore device with keyboard and using one to code or write with was weird. I was interested in business applications and lusted after an IBM, but they were expensive. Soon IBM compatible machines emerged, and my first foray into the computer world around 1991 was such a beast. I cannot recall the name of the machine nor its specifications, except that it had a 32-bit Intel 386 chip. At least I took a video of it when filming my home in 1997, so you can see it here with my wife Linda posing next to it. If you recognise this model, no, not my wife, please comment below. It was a standard beige box upon which stood a VGA colour monitor. Again, I cannot recall the make, but I do know this was upgraded to a stunning 17-inch Taxon 1024x768 CRT SVGA monitor at a price of £500, equivalent to about $11.65 today. This 1997 VHS video screenshot shows the Taxon. The computer operating system was originally Microsoft Windows 3, which I updated to Windows 3.1, then Windows 95. The memory was probably about 16 megabytes with no additional video memory card. The only card I added was a 33K modem. It did incorporate 2 floppy disk drive units, a 5¼ inch and the new 3.5 inch disk sizes. And most importantly, a turbo button, which did nothing but light up and change an irrelevant display number when pressed. The computer had no internal speaker except for a shrill beeper to let you know when some button was incorrectly operated, so eventually added a simple sound card to control a pair of dual-powered speakers. Printing came courtesy of a neat Canon bubblejet model, BJ10EX, which I got in '91 and which printed in clear black ink. Not as neat and precisely as the expensive Office LaserJet machines, but much improved over the usual dot matrix affairs most consumer printers used. You can also see I had a full-size keyboard, a mouse and an attached joystick. I recall the joystick was used with an early version of Microsoft Flight Simulator, the version for Windows 95. However, as usual, games had still not gripped me. I preferred the realism of simulators, including Colin McRae's Rally, than shoot 'em ups like Wolfenstein, but more often you find me using the aforementioned Lotus 123, a word processor, Display Write 4, which I borrowed from work, or the desktop publishing program, Microsoft Publisher. In fact, the oldest file I have stored on my iPad today are a few historic .pub files that originally generated in 1993, 30 years ago. However, I'm unable to open them now without indulging in a great deal of faff. This setup served me well until around 1998 when I upgraded to a Packard Bell Pulsar 23, which as a tower case took up far too much space on my desk along with all the other bits and pieces I was acquiring, as you can see from this picture taken in 2005. The Packard Bell had an Intel Pentium MMX 233 MHz chip running on 64 MB RAM, comprised of 32 MB SD RAM with a 32 MB SIM upgrade, implemented with a 2 MB standard video RAM boasted by an accessory Orchid Ritius 3D2 12 MB ATI Rage 2 plus 3D acceleration card. Storage was a contemporarily gigantic 4.3 GB hard drive, and outside access was via a 56K modem through FreeServe, connected at about 33K usually. FreeServe was bought by Wanadu in 2000 and then by Orange in 2006, by which time I'd switched to a BT Home Cub to give me 6 MB download capacity. My 17-inch Taxon SVGA monitor still did the business, but my audio speakers were supplemented with a Yamaha subwoofer. You can also see I had changed my mouse, but kept the trusty Canon BubbleJet printer in the system. Although, as you can see from the box below the desk, a new Epson Photo RX420 colour printer was waiting to be deployed. I still ran Microsoft Windows 95 and continued to do so until at least 2000, having not upgraded to 98, 98 SE or 2000. However, I eventually upgraded to Microsoft Windows ME. The Windows versions conveniently hid the OS in the background, and I rarely ventured into white on black screens. However, the many megabyte RAM requirements, 10 minutes to start up and hours to download and install security backups on a daily basis, were a pain. For software, Willie Gates had my vote at the time as far as usable programs went. His pricing policy was questionable, as was the constant redevelopment of ideas. I had no problem with him making trillions, as his products revolutionised the way we work together. But he could have been fairer to legitimate users. The policy of constantly reinventing basic necessities, yes, I'm talking Windows, seemed to touch greedy. No wonder so many turned to piracy in the early days. Why did class-leading products with their international markets, sold in hundreds of thousands of units, sell for the highest prices? I wished Billy Boy would ship them out cheaper so we could all buy the software legitimately in their millions more, and so make Microsoft even richer. I knew they could do with the extra cash. The Big M, no, not McDonald's, also did well on applications, so other software was often also Windows-based Microsoft fare. I had learnt spreadsheets on Lotus 123 and early on supported this application along with the other excellent programs they produced, particularly the unsurpassed Organizer. The Lotus look was generally superior to Microtosh, but the mighty Gates stronghold was ever more eclipsing the user base. Overall, I didn't think that would be a problem, as compatibility was paramount in this new technology of computing. Make it work, make it compatible, backwards and forwards, and above all, make it cheap. That's all we asked for. So, my early use of Lotus 123 had been replaced by Excel, and Word had become the go-to business tool for wordage. But I wish they could improve email programs. I hadn't used one that wasn't total pants. Overall, the Packard Bell was a quantum leap forward in processing speed compared to my first desktop. In those days, updates often were. However, I'd been regularly updating the operating system and software when I could, so the change from one interface style to another seemed progressive rather than dramatic. The big Packard Bell difference was the start screen. They had decided that a lot of the buyers were first-time users, and to assist, introduced their own friendly startup interface, the Navigator Shell. This very graphical user interface was initially interesting and attractive to use. It comprised of a well-drawn illustration of a rather old-fashioned wooden study with the desks and shelves. On the desk were sat a telephone, calculator and fax machine. On the shelf some hi-fi components and speakers with a picture above. Further into the room you could see a library with shelves. Click the mouse on any of those items and the interface would change straight into the relevant section of the Windows interface. For example, clicking the calculator would bring up the inbuilt Windows calculator. Selecting the Hi-Fi would bring up the media player, and navigating into the library would take you to another illustrated room, this time with more shelves containing pictures of all the applications available. And if I remember correctly, clicking on the window would access the World Wide Web. All well, good and pretty, but a bit childish if you already knew your way around Windows and its operating system, with the worst bit being it couldn't be overridden, meaning it annoyed you every time you started up. In 1999 I became self-employed, so needed to market myself professionally, therefore bought my first laptop. It was a black Dell Inspiron 7000 model running an Intel Pentium 2 chip at 336 MHz. Memory consisted of 128 MB RAM and had a 4.02 GB hard drive. We also purchased a laptop PCI MIA modem card. For software, the Dell came bundled with Windows 3.0, which updated to 3.1, 95 and finally XP in due course. It was built like a tank and more than stood up to the punishing world of business use and playing solitaire on the train commute home. The company approved of my choice and I was sent out to clients armed to the teeth with a pen and tech. The pen was to sign my expenses sheet. For a couple of years at least, until most organisations in the early 2000s started to become nervous about outside consultants importing viruses into their systems. As a result, it became commonplace for companies to instead reconfigure some out-of-date old PC tat that they already had lying around to use on their own networks. From then on, commuting became a doddle with just my pen in hand. I still had to sign those expenses. By 2003, the Dell was proven a bit creaky. Still in good condition, the mechanisms were as solid as new, but the bits inside were becoming dated. Laptops are notoriously difficult to upgrade beyond simple memory and drive swaps, so when the chipsets become dated, a whole new device is needed. In the end, I donated the Dell to my mother because she wanted a laptop to simply browse the web, play Mahjong and run a knitting pattern program. It mostly sat idle as my father already had a handful of various devices and other things to occupy himself, so rarely assisted my mum in overcoming her natural reticence to learn a computer. For me, a replacement new Dell was a good option, but as this was to be primarily a non-business purchase, except for tax purposes of course, I could look at a more competitive option. I found a supplier in the next conurbation and purchased a big Novatech laptop. Novatech put together devices to customer specifications, so were custom models based around a range of cases and motherboards. My specification was a Novatech Soprano with a super fast, overclocked 3.07 GHz Intel Pentium 4 chipset. It ran on 512 MB RAM and storage was a gigantic, for then, 60 GB hard drive. Access to the outside world was via the built-in 56K modem, through which I only ever seemed to clock between 25 and 44K, never understanding the difference. Display was through the 64 MB video processor powered 15-inch TFT LCD, and the audio inside was supplied by two small shrill insects inside somewhere that liked to go bleep very loudly at times. Software used was Microsoft XP Professional, because I realised I could purloin a version from work. The laptop was heavy for a portable, even without the engineering brick-sized power adapter, so tested my stamina when transporting it backwards and forwards to the big city on a train. Less of a portable, more of a movable. In use, the quality of the hinges and keyboard was a power imitation of the Dell, but the overclocked chip meant it was stunningly fast. Stunningly fast, but also stupendously loud, with the big chipset fan firing on all cylinders most of the time. Frankly embarrassing when used at the office. This and its unusual make created quite a bit of a stir at times. What the Novatech did was to become my go-to machine to conceive, design, create, produce, check and publish my first website. I had commuting time in which to program in HTML to the confusion of fellow passengers who mostly expected to see solitaire being played out, as was the norm. As a result, in 2003, vinceunlimited.co.uk was launched on an unsuspecting public to absolutely no acclaim whatsoever. As it was my first effort at designing and producing a website, I decided to keep it simple using a widely available program which would produce a product that was readable on the majority of the world's basic computers, using minimum facilities. From the outset I decided that content was far more important than fancy graphics and fonts, although I'd hoped to improve the general look in future releases when more users would have faster internet access. A standard look is vital in creating visual consistency and will aid the reader in remembering the site, and it saved me having to constantly invent styles. Originally, to program, I used a standard version of Microsoft Front Page Express version 2.0. Although from version 1.3 of my site, the code was handwritten by me in HTML using Microsoft Notepad. At the time, no other software was used. Did it show? I used Smart FTP as a file transfer protocol to upload the site onto the web because it was free for private users. By 2009, I had subsequently changed to use CyberDuck, another free uploading service. Also free at the time, FreeServe was my internet service provider. And I used Webmania as a web service provider, which although was not free, was reasonably priced. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that trip down memory lane, which I first wrote about in my website in October 2003. By 2007 I had discovered Apple computers, so things changed a bit from then. But you'll have to send me loads of likes to get me to tell that story, and subscribe below to improve your chances of being told when this happens. Or maybe you want to know about my website versions. Just let me know in the comments. Meanwhile, thanks for watching through to the end. So I'm going to reward you with how I saw the future of computers technology way back in 2003. This has not been altered since first written. If you don't believe that, given my website is now only available via Internet Archive sites, why not look at my Vince Unlimited WordPress entry dated 19th of October 2017. But not before you hear about my prediction. I went full on crystal ball, and as we're already part way there, you can see where I was spot on and where my spot was truly off. Welcome to the future. Check out my computer specification of the future, my October 2003 guess for the future year of 148 AV, Anno Vinci. The desktop system will be AOF Serve Brooklyn 2020 using a carbon fibre micro case with AMD, touchy, ZZR series 38.9 terahertz quad bus bio platform, still running through 56K DOS. This will have a 93 gigabyte TAM, total access memory, and 222 megabyte standard video RAM boosted with a 4D VR 12 gigabyte acceleration card, giving graphics from a 6789 by 2212 screen utilising 32,000,001 colours. They found another one, hurrah! Storage will be a bioneural vector imaging carbo file store with a measurable capacity pseudo hard drive utilising aluminium organospheres. Unfortunately, still no room for video files. Outside access will be via a 464M video modem through we will actually pay you $50 still connecting about 33K usually. Software will be Aircon, which is much better than Windows. Audio to be supplied through a multi-phase version 6.947.34A displayed on a widescreen 73-inch plasma projector SCD with Dolby Sun Pro Logisense Sensurround implant mini speakers with built-in gigawoofer. Boom! A watch top will be a Rolex Pro Diamante with Apple chip processor and a super light mini screen glued to the inside of your contact lens. Controlled by thought-activated inputs. Solar powered with an 11-month backup battery developed by the Norwegians, unsurprisingly. For the printer, I'll still have my Canon Bubble Jet, although I've now changed the ink cartridge. Well, how did I do? Comments below. See you in my next video. Thanks for watching.